A now often forgotten aspect of Lenin's State and Revolution is that Lenin did not always hold those views, and they were actually heavily influenced by Bukharin. This fact would have been indisputed before 1930, but now it is nearly fully forgotten by many people who claim to follow Lenin's ideas. This, I think, shows us that Lenin too made mistakes and changed his views, and helps us understand those evolutions in his thinking. Originally, this was just going to be a portion of my biography video on Bukharin that I've been working on. However, that thing is pushing 2 hours long, and I thought this might do better as a standalone video. Still gonna make the biography video, but I wanted to get this out now. In early 1916, Bukharin produced Towards a Theory of the Imperialist State, sending it to Lenin to be published. Bukharin would take what were some controversial positions, especially at the time, in it. Lenin was also expecting an economic article from him, and not an article in the theory of the state. Here's a few paragraphs from it which Lenin disagreed with greatly. Thus, the state of future is a society without a state organization. Despite what many people say, the difference between Marxists and anarchists is not that Marxists are statists, or anarchists are anti-statists. The real difference in views of the future structure is that the socialists see a social economy resulting from the tendencies of concentration and centralization, the inevitable companions of development of the productive forces, whereas the economic utopia of the decentralist anarchist carries us back to pre-capitalist forms. The socialists expect the economy to become centralized and technologically perfected. The anarchists would make any economic progress whatever impossible. The form of state power is retained only in the transitional moment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, a form of class domination in which the ruling class is the proletariat. With the disappearance of the proletarian dictatorship, the final form of the state's existence disappears as well. In the growing revolutionary struggle, the proletariat destroys the state organization of the bourgeoisie, takes over its material framework, and creates its own temporary organization of state power. Having beaten back every counterattack of reaction and cleared the way for free development of socialist humanity, the proletariat, in the final analysis, abolishes its dictatorship as well. Lenin initially considered publishing it as a discussion article, but found it to be too incorrect on the question of the state. Now, without fully going into the history of this, Kautsky and many prominent other Marxists of this era had completely dropped any idea of smashing of the bourgeois state and the construction of a worker state or a dictatorship of the proletariat. This was a product of them capitulating and becoming reformists. So Bukharin was going against the most common Marxist understanding of the state and revolution at the time. Lenin felt that Bukharin had taken angles out of context, and specifically his idea that anarchists and Marxists at all do not differ on the state as being very incorrect. Lenin even went as far to accuse him of semi-anarchism, and said he fully downplayed the need for a state post-revolution. I think this was an unfounded accusation. As Bukharin wrote, the proletariat destroys the state organization of the bourgeoisie, takes over its material framework, and creates its own temporary organization of state power. This debate would be carried out in letters, which, at least according to what I can find, have never been published in full, so we really can't take a look at those, unfortunately. This debate would act as a sort of catalyst for Lenin to take a deeper look at the state and the works of Marx and Engels. The major impact Bukharin would have on Lenin was an accepted fact in the Soviet Union, even acknowledged by Stalin in 1929. However, in the years following that, there were attempts to downplay Bukharin's role. During this debate, Bukharin's mood was impacted and he fell into lower spirits. Bukharin made the choice to take a steamer to America. This was at the recommendation of a friend and fellow Bolshevik, Alexander Shopnikov. Shopnikov told him he should go write for a newspaper edited by Alexandra Kollontai in New York. When Lenin heard about this, he became deeply worried that he had driven Bukharin away. He inquired someone to find out with what mood Bukharin is leaving, and will he continue to write to Lenin and others and still fill requests for other documents. Lenin would then receive Bukharin's farewell letter. I'm going to quote in full the closing plea that Cohen includes from Bukharin's letter. I ask one thing of you. If you must polemicize, etc., preserve such a tone that it will not lead to a split. It would be very painful for me, painful beyond endurance, if joint work, even in the future, should become impossible. I have the greatest respect for you. I look upon you as my revolutionary teacher and love you. Lenin would respond saying the charges were valid, but he gave Bukharin praise and said, we all value you highly. Bukharin would respond, be well, think kindly of me, I embrace you all. In December of 1916, Lenin would say he was working towards producing an article of his own on it. To do this, Lenin started gathering all the works of Marx and Engels he could, and rereading it. Lenin wrote and prepared a notebook from January to February. These notes would form the basis of what would become the state and revolution. Lenin, after examining the question, concluded that Kautsky was far more wrong than Bukharin, but he still felt that Bukharin was wrong about a few things. But then, in May, Krupskaya told Bukharin that Lenin no longer had any differences with him on the question of the state, and according to Cohen, it is possible in a letter or through someone else, Bukharin might have been made aware of Lenin's shift in opinion earlier, possibly through Kollontai. In July of 1917, Lenin had to go into hiding and told Kamenev if the provisional government was able to kill him, that Kamenev was to publish his notes. Lenin managed to evade capture and turned his notes into The State and Revolution while hiding in Finland. It was originally planned to be published during 1917, but the revolution put a hold on it and it was not able to be published until January of 1918. We can see Lenin came to Bukharin's positions he previously was critical of by just looking at The State and Revolution. Let us take a look at the question of abolishing or smashing of the bourgeois state. Engels speaks here of the proletariat revolution abolishing the bourgeois state, while the word about the state withering away referred to the remnants of the proletarian state after the socialist revolution. According to Engels, the bourgeois state does not wither away, but it is abolished by the proletariat in the course of the revolution. What withers away after this revolution is the proletariat state, or semi-state. From 1852 to 1891, or for 40 years, Marx and Engels taught the proletariat that it must smash the state machine. This, in turn, results in the fact that at a certain stage in the development of democracy, it first welds together the class that wages a revolutionary struggle against capitalism, the proletariat, and enables to crush, smash to atoms, wipe off the face of the earth the bourgeois, even the republican bourgeois state machine, the standing army, the police, and the bureaucracy, and a substitute for them a more democratic state machine, but a state machine nevertheless, in the shape of an armed workers who proceed to form a militia involving the entire population. Lenin makes it pretty clear here the bourgeois state must be smashed and will be replaced with a proletarian state. This is exactly the same as Bukharin's position. The proletariat destroys the state organization of the bourgeoisie, takes over its material framework, and creates its own temporary organization of state power. Of course, Lenin majorly expanded on the writings on the dictatorship of the proletariat, as well as included major quotations from Engels and Marx, as well as polemicizing against Kautsky. So how about Bukharin's position of needing to emphasize the inherent opposition to the state, as well as that anarchists and Marxists don't disagree on the question of the state under communism? To prevent the true meaning of his struggle against anarchism from being distorted, Marx expressly emphasized the revolutionary and transient form of the state which the proletariat needs. The proletariat needs the state only temporarily. We do not at all differ with the anarchists on the question of the abolition of the state as the aim. Though Lenin would agree there is no difference with anarchists on the eventual aim to have no state, but that it is a question of the time scale and the need for the proletariat to construct its own state, which would be abolished in the form of it withering away, as well as maybe the most famous quote from State and Revolution: "So long as the state exists, there is no freedom. When there is freedom, there will be no state." So, just as Bukharin did have, here we have Lenin emphasizing the opposition to the state. Bukharin produced a review of The State and Revolution, and the only English translation I can find is on leftcom.org. So I'm going to go pull some quotes from that. I assume despite it being a more political source, they have not distorted the translation. I just want to pull a few words from it. No state will exist in communist societies, since all differences between classes will disappear, say the founders of scientific communism. The future state is a social democratic ideal. During the transitional period between capitalism and socialism, the dictatorship of the proletarian state is necessary to definitively break the bourgeoisie. It exists as an instrument to ensure the subjugation of the bourgeoisie. The struggle against the bourgeois state until it is destroyed. Hatred for it is the main mechanism of oppression. That's the slogan of our venerable predecessors. The servile social democrats submissively teach support for the state. It is true patriotism and state wisdom. Basically, this is the difference between the teaching of revolutionary Marxists, that is to say communists, and that of social opportunist traitors who have turned their backs on the teaching of Marxism and who swear by the name of Marx, but at the same time betray his teachings in the most cynical way. Lenin's little book perfectly shows this difference, and the reader cannot blame the author for extensively quoting the works of Marx and Engels. These works silence these vile slaves of capital, who say they are social democrats, as they silence all the Mensheviks, the SR, the Bundists, the followers of Scheiderman and New Life, who dare to speak on behalf of the great masters. Today, every comrade has to read Lenin's book. I explore this more in the biography video. The position of smashing of the bourgeois state was key in Bukharin having the correct position of socialist revolution and the smashing of the bourgeois state, meaning the provisional government in Russia in 1917. It clearly can be seen in Lenin's position once he returns to Russia, calling for revolution and a dictatorship of the proletariat or commune state, where many other Bolsheviks lagged behind and thought the provisional government must be supported and participated in it. These new views of Lenin actually got him described as an anarchist by Mensheviks and Bolsheviks. I hope this was helpful. I would highly recommend you read the works mentioned, both Lenin's State and Revolution and Bukharin's, though Bukharin's original article apparently is not in its complete form and has been partially lost to time. I think all of this is important to know, as I think it aids in understanding State and Revolution and the context behind it. I think it's also a shame, due to Bukharin's fall from power in 1930 and execution in 1938, this contribution was intentionally erased and then forgotten. You should also give Bukharin's The Economics of the Transition Period and what he wrote alongside Preobrazhensky, The ABC of Communism. Both are good works that touch on the same subject. If you want to know more about Bukharin, you can wait for my video to come out, which is hopefully soon. But you can also pick up Stephen F. Cohen's excellent biography of him, which was also a major source I used for this video.